In October of 1988, federal accident investigators sent a letter to the Federal Aviation Administration. It asked for one thing: put smoke detectors in the cargo holds that do not have them. The agency wrote back. It said the detectors would not provide a significant degree of protection and that it was ending the work. The recommendation was stamped closed and marked with 2 words: unacceptable action. 8 years later, a jet took off from Miami with 110 people on board and a fire in the cargo hold that nobody could see. Every airliner you have ever flown in has smoke detection in its cargo compartments. That is not because the industry decided it was a good idea. It is because of what burned under the floor of this aircraft in the 10 minutes after it left the ground. And when the investigators finally wrote their report, they did something they almost never do. They named the refusal itself as a cause of the deaths. To understand why those detectors mattered, you have to understand the compartment they were meant to go in. An airliner's cargo hold is not one design. There are classes, and they are lettered. A Class D hold was the cheapest and simplest of them. It had no smoke detector, no fire extinguisher, and no way for the crew to see inside it. It was not an oversight. It was the design. The idea was containment. A Class D hold was built to be nearly airtight, lined with material that resisted burn-through. If a fire started in there, it would consume the small amount of oxygen sealed in with it, and then it would go out on its own. Starve it, and it dies. On paper, that works. But the whole design rests on a single assumption: that nothing inside the hold can make its own oxygen. For most of what people put on an aeroplane, that assumption holds. Suitcases do not manufacture air. And so for decades, thousands of aircraft flew with cargo holds that were sealed, silent, and blind, protected by nothing more than chemistry that was expected to behave. On the 3rd of February, 1988, a fire broke out in the cargo hold of an American Airlines jet on the ground in Nashville. It was a Class D compartment. There was no detector, so the crew learned about it only when smoke reached the cabin above. Nobody died, but the investigators who examined it understood exactly what they had been shown, and in October they wrote to the Federal Aviation Administration asking for fire and smoke detection in every Class D hold in the country. The agency did not act. 5 years later, in August of 1993, it answered in writing. Detection systems, it said, would not provide a significant degree of protection to the people on board, and the rulemaking was terminated. That October, the recommendation was formally closed, classified as unacceptable action. The file was shut. Now consider the object that would eventually break the design. A chemical oxygen generator is the device behind the mask that drops from the ceiling of an airliner. It is not a tank of stored air. It is a small canister packed with a chemical that, once triggered, undergoes a reaction that releases oxygen. The reaction also releases heat. A generator firing can reach several hundred degrees on its outer casing. So it is a device that produces oxygen and high heat at the same time, which makes it precisely exactly the one cargo that a Class D hold cannot survive. Put it in the sealed box that defends itself by running out of air, and it will manufacture the air. There was a rule for this. Expired generators were hazardous material. They were supposed to be fitted with a safety cap over the firing pin, and they were never to be flown as ordinary cargo. In the spring of 1996, a maintenance contractor working for ValuJet was stripping 3 older aircraft. Among the parts removed were more than 100 chemical oxygen generators, most of them near or past their expiry date, with their chemical cores still unspent. The caps were not fitted. Mechanics later said they did not have them. The generators were placed into 5 cardboard boxes, packed with bubble wrap, and the boxes were marked in a way that suggested they were empty. Paperwork described them as aircraft parts. On the 11th of May, those 5 boxes were carried out to a DC-9 at Miami International Airport and loaded into the forward cargo hold, along with 3 tires and the passenger's luggage. Nothing about them was declared as dangerous. The ramp agent who stacked them remembered a clink from inside one of the boxes. The hold was a Class D compartment. Flight 592 lifted off in the early afternoon, carrying 110 people. About 6 minutes later, the cockpit voice recorder caught a sound in the cabin, and then voices calling out. The captain radioed that they had smoke in the cockpit and asked to return to Miami. There had been no warning light, because there was no detector to light it. By the time anyone on that aircraft knew there was a fire, the fire had already been burning underneath them for minutes. Fed by oxygen it was making for itself. What followed was very fast. The crew turned back toward Miami. In the cabin behind them, the smoke thickened, and the recording captured shouts of fire. The fire was directly beneath the cockpit floor, and it was burning at a temperature that ordinary cabin materials are not built to resist. Control cables and wiring ran through that space. Roughly 10 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft went into a steep descent and struck the Everglades at high speed. All 110 people on board were killed. The crash site was a swamp. The aircraft had struck soft mud and water and gone almost entirely beneath the surface, which meant there was very little wreckage to see, and a great deal that had to be recovered by hand from contaminated water. Investigators worked in the sawgrass for weeks. They recovered the boxes. They recovered generators and found the pattern of heat damage that told them which ones had fired. The reconstruction was unusually clear for an air disaster. The fire had begun in the forward cargo hold. It had been started by one or more oxygen generators activating, and it had grown in a compartment specifically designed to smother fires, because the cargo in that compartment was producing the one thing the design assumed could never be there. The investigation assigned blame in 3 directions, and it did not flinch from the 3rd. The maintenance contractor had failed to prepare, package, and identify the generators before handing them over. ValuJet had failed to properly oversee the contractor doing its maintenance and had failed to make sure that the people handling its aircraft knew the airline's own rule against carrying hazardous materials. And the 3rd finding was aimed at the regulator. The Federal Aviation Administration had failed to require smoke detection and fire suppression in Class D cargo compartments. Investigators went further than that. They stated that had the agency required those systems when they were recommended in 1988, this flight would likely not have crashed. In the language of accident investigation, the refusal was not background. It was causal. The company that packed the boxes was prosecuted. The airline was grounded for months and never recovered its name. But the change that outlasted all of it was written into the rules of the aircraft itself. In February of 1998, the agency issued the rule it had rejected a decade earlier. Cargo compartments had to have smoke detection and fire suppression, and existing aircraft had to be retrofitted. The Class D compartment, the sealed blind box that defended itself by running out of air, was effectively eliminated from passenger aviation. Thousands of aircraft were rebuilt. If you fly tomorrow, there is a detector in the hold beneath you and a way to put a fire out down there, and a light that will tell the 2 people at the front that something is wrong while they still have time to do something about it. 110 people bought that. The warning that would have bought it 8 years earlier was written down, sent to the right agency, read, and answered in 2 words. Thank you for watching.